Episode 262, Self-Reliance. Just how much garden do we need? This is the Change Underground for the 28th of June 2021. I'm your host, John Moore. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. I'll begin this week with a big shout out to Tara and Kendall, who took advantage of the Buy Me a Coffee facility on the website to, well, not surprisingly, buy me some coffees. I am deeply appreciative of their decision to chip in to help keep this podcast on the air. If this idea appeals to you, there's a link in the show notes or over at the website worldorganicnews.com. Thanks again, Tara and Kendall. So just how much garden do we need to feed ourselves? Well, this will vary obviously with climate, soil aspect and so on, to the point where it may well be a pointless exercise, but not quite. So for this I'm assuming a relatively temperate climate with the ability to grow plants in the ground, or to have plants in the ground for most, if not all of the year. I'm also assuming an integration of plants and animals. At this stage I'm focusing on a suburban type backyard situation. This is useful for larger sites too, but could just represent the first year's garden on a new small holding to get food happening while the other systems are being set up. But keep in mind that I'm referring basically to the backyard throughout this episode. I'll also be quoting areas in square metres. To convert to square feet for those working still in the Imperium, 1 square metre is just under 11 square feet. So if you work on a 10-to-1 ratio, the maths are easier and the results will be close enough. So, a suburban backyard. Here in sunny Australia, they've come down from a quarter acre to 600 square metres, basically. So 1,000 down to 600 so that they can jam more in. So if we take off the house, the garage, maybe a garden or play area for the kiddies, I'm working on the assumption that we have 200 square metres for a Change Underground system garden. Now, alternatively, you could take that 200 square metres, add 50 square metres to it and stick a tiny house on it and allow an individual or couple to live reasonably well, food-wise, and maybe even have some surpluses to sell or swap. But back to suburbia. So the aim of the exercise is to feed a family of 4 with some surpluses to swap or sell. And we're using earthworms and hens as our animals. And for plants, we're using sweet corn, rye corn, vegetable herbs, raspberries, apples, apricots and plums. And so if we take that 200 square metres for food production and allow 10% or so for paths, that gives us 180 square metres for chickens, worms and veggies. Soft fruit and espaliered fruit trees can be placed along fence lines. This gives us more production from less space. Now, 200 square metres may seem a small area, but worked intensively and with thought, it can be very productive. So the garden beds themselves are 15 metres long, or that's about 50 foot, I think, and 0.9 of a metre wide, that's 3 foot. And with the beds back to back, that gives you 20 centimetre walkway between the two, which is about 8 inches, which is enough to get your feet into. I'd see room for 1 chicken unit on one of the garden beds, and 12 others for growing. Now the chicken unit could be either a chook tractor moved along a bed, which you planted out to parrot mix or something similar, or you could have a long run over the bed that you just transfer to the next bed as it rotates through the system. I picked parrot mix because it provides a variety of feed for the hens, maintains soil life and adds variety to the system. Now the chickens would provide about 2 dozen eggs a week, which isn't bad. And the chicken tractor maintains the 12 garden beds, so with the 13 altogether, chickens feeding on one of these and then rotating across the other 12 over time. Now to those 12 garden beds. 12 in use at any one time means 24 production cycles, 12 summer crops and 12 winter. So as a general rule of thumb, you can work on plantings being made in spring and autumn at the equinoxes. In practice, those seedlings are just placed into the beds as each bed is harvested, and everything not eaten by humans is fed to the chooks or the worms. Now, for those 12 beds, I've laid them out. I'm growing the following. Beds 1 and 2, sweet corn. This is for humans and stock. Tomatoes in beds 3 and 4 for humans. Bed 5 is zucchini for humans or the chooks. So same with bed 6, it's squash. Then bed 7's beans. Bed 8 is herbs. Beds 9 and 10 I've got down to rye corn, which is for humans and stock. And same with beds 11 and 12, human and stock with potatoes. Now in the winter crops I'll be growing broad beans, rye corn, peas, carrots, vetch and kale. That's 2 beds for each of those 6 species. And all of those are for humans or stock except for the vetch, which is for the soil and the stock really, because it's another legume. Now you could reasonably replace the sweet corn in beds 1 and 2 with a flour corn and produce quite a lot of flour for the year. So you could add pancakes or cornbread or whatever to your diet. Now this would mean a change of diet for some, but that's not such a bad thing, particularly if you've grown it yourself and you know what's there. The rye corn, if you harvested and threshed and winnowed and all the rest of it and then ground it up, would mean black bread in its purest form. Or you could use it for chook feed or replace it with wheat. It's all about swings and roundabouts and where you live and what you want to eat. Other larger variations would involve bringing in rabbits. Bear with me. So on the 13 beds, if say 7 rabbit tractors, similar to the chook tractors, were run, you could keep about 105 Angoras, giving about 105 kilos a year of Angora wool. Now, Angora wool sells roughly for $100 a kilo, and you'd still have some veggies and whatnot for yourselves or maybe to swap or sell. Particularly the fruit wouldn't change because the espaliered fruit and the soft fruit around the edges doesn't vary with this idea of the rabbits. And that'd give a reasonably modest sort of side hustle income of between 10 and 20,000 depending on prices. Now with clever marketing and some value adding, the Angora rabbits could bring you closer to 400 a kilo from what I've checked out on eBay and places. Such value adding would just start off with spinning the wool, or you could knit it or felt it or weave it even. And the more you do to a product, the more value you get in return because of the labour you've put into it, provided you can find somewhere to sell it. eBay and Etsy would spring to mind, probably Gumtree or even Facebook Marketplace, but I've never tried those last two for those sorts of things. Now, of course, you could opt to house the rabbits in your garage or your shed, leave the car out on the road for all it matters, and use all 13 beds for crops, and still keep the chooks on there too. The rabbit hutches could then be placed over worm bins in the shed, and the vermicompost created directly under the rabbits could be used to top dress the beds or to sell to fishermen for bait or whatever. Now, this would mean more use of the wheelbarrow and less in situ fertiliser and whatnot, but it would be a reasonable choice, I suspect. So with the application of a little thought, 200 square metres could be brought into productivity and may even be used to create an income. Not a big one, obviously, but if you've got no other debts and you own your housing outright, it's not a bad income. At the very least, it can replace 90% of your food bill on a small piece of land. By using no-dig methods, you'd improve the productivity over time as well as your soil grows. So if you'd like to start a gardening adventure like this and a lifetime of astonishing insights, there's a link in the show notes and over on the website for a free ebook, worldorganicnews.com/free ebook, no doubt. And you can obtain a free copy of the ebook there that outlines the Change Underground no-dig gardening system to get you started. If you have any questions, thoughts or suggestions, I've opened a Facebook group called imaginatively the Change Underground podcast group. You can search for that on the Book of Faces, or there's a link in the show notes and in the transcript over at worldorganicnews.com/episode 262. Following the website crash a while back, I'm slowly adding back more transcripts. So So the website, the podcasts themselves are still up on Libsyn, but all the links and whatnot on those show notes go nowhere at the moment, but I'm rebuilding them. Thank you so much for your patience. And thanks again to Tara and Kendall for the coffees. It is what powers this podcast. So remember, decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Thank you all for listening. I'll be back next week.